Hello, welcome to the show. I'm Robert Steven Mack. As a master's student studying public affairs, I believe one of the best things about college is the conversations that you can have with people of many different backgrounds. More than anything, this show promotes that spirit of discussion. Each episode features a new guest and brings you stimulating conversations with accomplished creatives and intellectuals who are connected to Indiana University. We want to take you into their minds and through their paths to success. My first guest is filmmaker Angelo Pizzo. Much like his best-known films Hoosiers and Rudy, Pizzo is a product of Indiana. Raised in Bloomington, he attended Indiana University before furthering his studies at the University of Southern California. His work has reached millions as the screenwriter of Hoosiers and Rudy, which are considered by outlets like ESPN as being among the greatest sports films of all time, with Hoosiers ranked at #1. Pizzo has since moved back to Indiana, but still maintains a very active career in film. Angelo, thanks for joining me. When you were at IU, did you see yourself becoming a filmmaker?
No, not at all. I didn't have any notion of that. I love films, but I thought of it as an avocation, not a vocation. And in part, I look back at why that was. I think it was a combination of a couple of reasons. One is there were no role models around for me to see a path, a career path. I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who knew anybody. That was number one. Number two, the cost of making films, just even as an amateur, buying a 16 millimeter camera. I mean, we had 8 millimeter cameras back then, but they were very primitive. Just the ability to create your own work is so much easier now than it was then. And on top of that, I never really thought of myself as a creative person. And my focus was to work on something that was another interest of mine. I wouldn't call it a passion, but of all the subjects in school that I cared about most, history was it, and storytelling in history. And ultimately, I ended up in international relations, world politics. And my father was involved in politics here in Bloomington and got to know some of the important families around in Indiana, including the Bai family. And I was promised a job to work for Senator Birch Bai as a page if I graduated. When I graduated, and my plan was to go to grad school in Washington, D.C., and maybe work toward not running for office, but to work in Washington as a policy wonk, and most particularly interested in maybe the State Department to continue my my studies of international relations. So but that all blew up because of one external fact, and that was the Vietnam War. I became passionately involved in anti-war movements. I'm using passion again. And I end up actually being one of the rare cases of someone who applies for conscientious objection status, and I got accepted. And I applied in a non-religious manner, philosophical. So I ended up, the summer that I was going to head to Washington, I traveled around the Midwest and was a consultant and advisor for other potential COs and to help them try to write their briefs. And then I spent about a year just escaping reality in a sense. I went to ski a season in Aspen, and I surfed a summer in Hawaii, and it was at the end of that, it was about a year and a half of just kind of wandering and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next, that I had a conversation with my father that that really made me think about things in a different kind of way, which was he recognized my passion and my love for films, and he said, if you can figure out a way to make a living at it, then you're blessed. Because my dad was a doctor, and he said he loves going to work every day, and he said you could find a job like that, then that's something that you should treasure and you should pursue, and that he would support my pursuit of that goal in any way, shape, or form, financially and otherwise. So I growing up in a college town, you sort of where I ended up thinking about film and how I could apply my interest in and love for film in a practical way of making a living was to get a degree in it and teach it. So my approach was academic. And I went to talk to the head of the comparative literature department, who actually that's where the very few classes that were taught in film history, theory, and criticism were in that arena. And he said that he would give me a job as an instructor at IU if I got an advanced degree at one of three universities. And only three universities gave advanced degrees. When I say advanced degrees, I'm not talking about master, I'm talking about doctorates. So NYU, UCLA, and USC were the three. I applied to all three, and I was accepted into USC, rejected by the other places. And I was fortunate to get in USC because they had just created a new department to focus on the academic scholarly approach to studying film. And they had a dedicated history, theory, and criticism department. So that's how I ended up in LA. And I ended up writing a master's thesis and a doctoral thesis. And I can keep going on my career, but that's sort of like, you asked originally, did I think about being a filmmaker at IU? And I said, and the answer is, I don't think I thought about being a filmmaker until I was actually working in the film business. I was at USC for 3 years doing this work. And I sort of accidentally got involved in the film business. And then I got jobs in various stages of what they call executive or development jobs in the industry, in the studio system. And I ended up supervising writing scripts and developing projects, and ultimately supervising the production of films themselves. And I did that for 6 years. At no time, well, maybe a few times, did I think about I was going to go off and do it myself. I never thought about writing. I did think about producing because I had put together the skill set at that time. After 6 years in the business of working in these jobs, I knew how to produce a movie. But that was as far as it went. I'm finally going to give you a chance to ask a second question.
Yeah, so it sounds like you didn't even see a path in Bloomington going into film until you sort of fell into it. But you still loved movies growing up, I imagine.
I did love movies growing up, and I think that I take a little bit of exception with I fell into it. I mean, I did put a lot of time, dedication, a lot of effort into mastering the subjects that were in front of me in the academic world there. But once I got and I'll tell you briefly what happened. I needed to finish up my hours, and I'd run out of classes to take at USC, so they gave me an opportunity to do a internship and get hours credits. And normally that only went to production students. And all the films have been taken up, and there was only a television sitcom left. It just so happened to be the last season of the Mary Tyler Moore Show. So I did an internship on that, and in doing that, I met a number of amazing people who worked on that show, including Grant Tinker, who was married to Mary Tyler Moore and was the president of MTM Productions. And he knew my academic bent, and he said that he had a friend who needed research being done for a television series that was just ordered under his aegis. So I went and met with this guy, and we really hit it off. He was a film buff, and we ended up talking hours about, film history. And I got the assignment to do research for this program, and he ended up hiring me as an assistant. And he told me that he could teach me everything there would be to know about making movies. He had an order for 13 one-hour episodes of a single season show. But and he said, I want you to be a filmmaker by the time you're done with this, and not academic. You can throw out all your books. It's all about the practical applications of how to make movies. Now, it's not the theoretical applications of how to make movies. So that was everything I learned in that first in that period of time, 4 to 5 months, are still the foundation for how I make movies today.
Did your time in an academic program contribute at all to your career eventually on the creative side, or was it more working and learning on the job, on the spot, in a more practical way, would you say?
I would say if I had to divvy up the percentage-wise, I would probably say 90% the latter, 10% the former. The one thing that spending as much time watching films and learning how filmmakers differed from each other and how they approach their material and the execution of that material was, I'm sure, influential in a lot of ways. And I learned a lot about how various filmmakers make their own movies. But you can sit down and write. Let me put it there. You can go to a film school and you can take 400 classes into how to write a script. It's not going to help you really write a script. I mean, when you sit down to write it, you're facing a blank page, and you're unless you want to imitate what somebody else has done, you're trying to create your own material that's fresh and that has a unique vision. Then all the textbooks in the world can't help you. The real power of, I think, the force of creativity for me comes from my left brain, not my right brain, not my left brain. The left brain or the right brain, I get these mixed up. One is analytical, rational, linear, objective, and the other is basically, I think about it like chakras, like, from the head up. I mean, I could watch any film and tell you that it looks like a combination of Bergman and Hitchcock and John Ford or whatever. I mean, my references were long and deep, but that doesn't mean anything, because I'm not John Ford or Ingmar Bergman or Alfred Hitchcock. I'm me, and I have to find my own voice and my own way of creating character and story, and that comes from the chakras below your head. It comes from your gut, comes from your heart, comes from your feel. You can be a great structuralist when it comes to doing these kind of things, but you'll be one step removed. And I read a ton of scripts. I probably read 1,000 screenplays working in those jobs. And I didn't learn how to write screenplays by doing it, but I learned what to avoid. I saw the pitfalls. I saw the cul-de-sacs. I saw the obstacles. I saw the reasons why. I started to understand the reasons why I connected to some material and didn't connect to other material, and got to appreciate the gifts of the truly skilled writer. And even though it's almost like I could sit down and read a novel of the greatest writers in the history of the English language, for example, and at the end of it, I wouldn't be a better writer. I wouldn't even be a writer at all. You only learn by doing, not by reading.
Depending on who you are, that could either be a sobering or liberating comment. So you moved from academia into the world of producing on the executive side. So what gives you the impetus then to go into the creative side of filmmaking?
Well, first of all, I never thought about the differentiation because when you are working as an executive, your primary job in every stage of the making of a movie is about giving notes, about giving advice, of giving your opinion, and that starts with a writer comes in and pitches a story, and look, I mean, the creative muscle was developed in those years because I would say, what if we made this character female instead of male? So I was sort of thinking about those things anyway. And when the first draft came in and it wasn't working, it was the impetus was on me to help the writer figure out how to fix it, how to solve the problems. So I had to start thinking like a writer, more like a script doctor writer. And I think that the whole function of working in that regard, in that era, in that way, that is to take an existing piece of material and start moving things around, that is definitely left brain stuff. That's analytical, linear, objective. And that's not about facing the blank page. And I had to deal with that when I finally decided to write my first script. I thought I'd be much more advanced than I was, but I was at total C when I had to sit down and start writing. So how I ended up doing that was that because I had developed, a pretty good reputation in the company, I was bumped up I moved over from television development to feature film development, and I became a vice president, and the president of the company told me that I'm free to develop my own ideas. Well, one of the ideas that I carried around for a long time was the special relationship between basketball and the people of Indiana. And so at that point, what I did was I tried to find writers from Indiana. I didn't really love Breaking Away. At least, I mean, let me go back and say, I think Breaking Away is a great movie. I think that it's a terrific script, won the Academy Award and deservedly so. But growing up in Bloomington, I didn't recognize any of those people. I mean, they could have been, that movie could have been set in Eugene, Oregon, for example. It was a generic small town in that way, other than the physical locations and the race itself. But those kids are called Stonies, or they're not even called Stonies, in the movie, they're called the Cutters. They had to change the name. That was what they were called. That was their nickname originally. And but those actors that they cast and the parents of the act, it was like, those aren't Bloomington people. Those aren't Bedford people. Those are, and it didn't matter to anybody outside the state of Indiana, or maybe anybody outside of Bloomington. But for me, I thought that I thought in order for a movie like Hoosiers to work, the details had to be spot on. And one of the issues and I got to know the writer, Steve Tessage, of Breaking Away. And I said, well, I never knew a guy like Dennis Christopher, growing up. He was the actor that played the lead. And he said, well, here was the problem in casting. Peter Gates, who is the director, was from London. He had never heard of the state of Indiana. So he had no clue. But as I said, it didn't really matter in terms of the movie is successful and works on its own. But for my movie, I wanted to make sure that the director was going to be from Indiana and that the writer was going to be from Indiana. And I was going to, and that's why I looked at and went to call the agents I worked with and asked for writing samples. And for about 2 months, I read a lot of different scripts and nothing struck, nothing hit me. It was at that time, the company I was working for, Time Life Films, they had to disband because of it was a lawsuit issue that not worth going into, but they had reconfigured their assets into HBO and TriStar. And that's the company that well, again, this is a technical side of it. They offered me a job at HBO, or they offered to pay my contract out in full. And because I did not get along with the president of HBO at the time, and also really HBO wasn't the HBO of now. They weren't really, they made an occasional documentary and an occasional movie, but it was very, very rare. They were just a premium cable channel. So I ended up taking that money and that salary, and I first wasn't going to write the script, but I decided to do some research and put some of the whole. I was originally going to do the Milan story, the story that inspired the movie. So I went down to the county seat, Ripley County, and spent 2 or 3 days in the library just taking notes. So I started to do research for the writer I was going to hire. And on the way back, I started thinking about writing it myself, and I did. Mm-hmm. So that changed my life.
And it went on to become a successful sports film. I think ESPN noted it as the #1 sports film of all time. To have a successful film like that continues in popularity to this day, what was that like at the time? And what is that like today? Most people who aspire to be filmmakers never experience that kind of success. So what was going through your mind?
Well, at every stage of the way, every step of the way, we were in a state of perpetual anxiety and terror, that we did not know what we were doing. When I say we, I'm talking about my college roommate who I brought in to direct the movie, David Anspaugh. He had directed episodes for Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere, a couple of MTM productions. But and I, of course, had not produced or written a feature film at that point. I produced a couple of TV movies, but it was a totally different kind of setup there. And we were kind of left on our own. We were given the money by a company that said, "Go make it." And we trust you guys know what we were doing, but we didn't know what we were doing. So we were flying by the seat of our pants at all times. And we had some difficult actors that we were working with. Barbara Hershey and Gene Hackman were not easy, and they kept on telling us that we were idiots and we had no clue what we were doing. So we believed them, but we kept on moving forward. And even when we were finished, the thing about making movies, and this whether you're a first-time filmmaker or if you made 40 movies, and I'm going to be directing a film I wrote this summer, and I can tell you, if anybody asks me how it's going, I'll tell them I don't know, because you can direct scene after scene after scene that really nothing ever turns out like you think it's going to, just because there are so many different elements in the collaborative process. The actor brings their own thing, the cinematographer brings their own, the production design, et cetera, and the weather. There are just so many vagaries, and you just hope for the best, and you hope that the collaborative energy and creativity make something special. But even though you may think, wow, that scene works, you'll never know whether it works in context with the other scenes that you're doing until you string them all together. So I don't care. I'm sure that Spielberg even gets to a point that he has no idea what he has until he gets into the cutting room. He probably has a much better sense of it than I do, but he still is, it's uncertain about the combination of these used to be called strips of film, connected together. And you only know when you put it in front of an audience that has no vested interest whatsoever. So when we finally did our first cut, because we didn't know what we were doing, we had a 3-hour and 45-minute cut. Then we got it down to 2 hours and 30 minutes that we thought was pretty good. We brought our friends and family in the studio, and our friends and family liked it, but the studio didn't. And so we were just caught between, we had no idea what we had, none. And it was, in fact, Orion Pictures that was distributed the film. They did not put the money up for the film. That was Hemdale, which is why they were so cavalier and negative about us. They didn't want to release the film at any point, but they had to because of a contractual obligation they had with this company. And but they could limit the distribution, and in fact, they were trying to make us get rid of the title Hoosiers. And the notion of having a 2.5 hour film was unacceptable to them. So, but we got to screen, that is, test market, do a test film for a mall audience in Irvine, California, and we end up scoring the highest score in the history of Orion Pictures. We scored a 94, and no other film had scored that high. And it was unexpected, certainly by all of us. And that was the first time I thought, well, we have a movie. We have a movie that people like. Up until then, I had no idea. And then afterwards, then we're fighting every step of the way. They still didn't, they forced us to cut another half hour of the movie, which kills me to this day. And then they said they would only release the film for a week in Indiana. And if it didn't do well, then they were going to pull, and that we would not get a national release. So we actually arrived in Indiana like 3 weeks before it opened it was a Thanksgiving weekend opening in 1985. And we were there knocking on everybody's door, please show up. We went on every radio and television, newspaper. I mean, it was like, we saturated the state, please show up for this first weekend.
So Hoosiers, and then you follow up that success with Rudy. And, most people would see your filmography and think, wow, Angelo Pizzo, one heck of a sports fan. Were you a sports fan growing up?
I was, but not as much as a lot of people I know. For example, my favorite sport was baseball, funny enough. But Indiana basketball, when I say Indiana University basketball was probably, I was more passionate about that than anything else, just because our first house was like 2 blocks from the old gymnasium where they would work out and play. And I used to go over there as a kid and just hang out and watch and kind of rebound free throws when they had breaks. And yeah, I was deeply connected. And I was a football fan to some extent. I played some football, I played some basketball, but then I just gave everything up in high school just because I was very rebellious at the time. Didn't want any adult telling me what to do, which would have been a coach. But as far as, being all sports guy, I didn't plan, and this wasn't my career path that I wanted to be Mr. Sports Film. It just so happened, and I was much more interested in, again, the kind of socioeconomic connection between basketball and the people of Indiana rather than the sport itself. I think if you're a real, and in terms of Rudy, of course, Rudy is a metaphor for, to me, the perfect set of characteristics to be successful in the film business. And I looked at it that way because I didn't like Notre Dame football growing up in Bloomington, but and there's actually not very much football, in Rudy. So I didn't want to be or try to be a sports film guy. It just turned out that way, circumstantially.
What about the storytelling in Hoosiers and Rudy work to make them so long-lasting, you think?
Well, I don't really go back, and I don't go back and think about and analyze my own movies. It's funny because you read reviews and some of them like, well, they understood what I was trying to do. They got it. And then you read the others and they don't like it. And it's like, they make good points, but this is I chose to do this instead of their version of it, and it didn't work for them, and that's fine. It's not going to work for everybody. I mean, we didn't test as well as Rudy, but Rudy sustained over the years as much as Hoosiers has. So who knows? I don't know. I think that the one thing I can talk about in terms of why I think these movies have sustained over the years and why they work for a lot of people is one of the things I just mentioned earlier, which is that I think there are characters in the movie that you learn to connect with and care about. And particularly in Rudy, I can't tell you how many people come up to me and say, oh, I see myself in Rudy. I'm a Rudy. I'm, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I mean, Rudy is a metaphor in a way, for anybody who's not valued, not seen, and what gives Rudy a strong, why we root for him, I believe, is because Rudy didn't allow other people to tell him or to define who he is, and to tell him to define what he could or couldn't do, what he was potentially capable of or not capable of. And he wrote his own story, and he did it in a way that, I mentioned earlier why Rudy resonated with me was one of the things that I thought was really important in one of the first lessons I learned in the film business was that you can't personalize rejection. And Rudy didn't. And, we had a line for about Rudy that he was fundamentally incapable of hearing the word no. Well, to me, that's a very empowering thing when I say for me, for a lot of people come to me and tell me about why they connected to Rudy, it's because they aspire to not let other people's opinions or fear of other people's opinions dictate what they do, and especially pursuing maybe their special dreams. I can tell you that you mentioned about me being a sports fan. We had two premieres of Rudy. One was in South Bend and one was in Los Angeles. And I only remember one comment from either one of the movies. And it was a woman who came up to me after the film, and I didn't know her, but her husband worked in the marketing division of TriStar that released the movie. And she said, I did not want to come to see this movie. My husband dragged me here. And the reason is I don't like sports. I don't like football. And I don't like anybody who's ever gone to Notre Dame, So I had like 3 strikes against this. He said, not only did I love this movie, I was like sobbing in the last 5 minutes. And he said, but more importantly, this made me think about pursuing something I really put on the shelf because I was afraid of what other people would say about it. And I remember putting my arms around her and saying, I made this film for you. I didn't make it for Notre Dame fans. I didn't make it for sports fans. I made it for you. And that's the power of a film that connects universally. I've talked to so many people from various European nations who have seen Rudy and how it inspired them. And of course, they have no connection to American football. So it really, it's not what the movie is about. It's about what the characters face and how universal and how personal that can be to the viewer and how it resonates in their own lives.
And just to wrap up, and you've touched on this a little bit, but what would you say to someone here in Bloomington at Indiana University studying film or wanting to make a move to Hollywood or wanting to tell stories on the big screen or on the small screen? What kind of advice would you give them?
Well, the thing that is different, as I mentioned earlier, than when I went to school is, you know what? You can make a movie with this. And I've seen movies made on iPhones that look actually phenomenal. I'm just blown away by how good they can look. If you really want to learn the craft, then you have to do the craft. And when I mean that, it's you may think you're not a writer. Well, you better learn how to tell a story, because every person I know that's really gifted at what they do is an innate storyteller. And when I say every person, I'm talking about every person on the crew. The best production designers, the best cinematographers really could step in as directors, in terms of my own experience. And they know innately the choices they make are about telling the story and revealing character. So that being the case, even if you never intend to be a writer or, I would say write every day, right? Write ideas, write scenes, write character sketches, and you never know. I mean, but it's a muscle that needs to be worked and it needs to be exercised. And the same thing is true. It doesn't really take much to put together a group of people to make a movie. And it doesn't, I mean, I think it's really important not to try to, on your first film, get it to Sundance, get it, make it for yourself, make it for your friends and family, and just do it for fun, and learn just the rudimentary basic skills about how film pieces are attached together, and what can come of utilizing, cutting into a scene at the beginning instead of the end, or in the middle rather than I mean, there's so many different ways in which you can learn the craft by doing it yourself. Don't wait around for people to hire you. Don't wait around for people to say yes to you. You have to do what you can that's within your control, and to exercise that creative muscle in whatever way, shape, or form. Whether if you want to be a cinematographer, just constantly shoot, and find actors who want to be shot, and do a scene from existing, from an existing screenplay or existing, as an exercise, and shoot it in 5 different ways, and then put it together later and see what works and doesn't work. You're the arbiter of your own future if you take control of it in that way.
I think that's a great note to end on. Angelo, thank you so much for joining me. And that's the show, folks. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next time with another guest and stimulating conversation.